Have you ever lost something so precious that it left a hole in your heart? Something, or someone, you thought would always be there, only to disappear without a trace? This is the story of Ryan and Titan, a boy and his loyal Pitbull, bound by a love that defied all odds. Titan wasn't just a pet, he was a guardian, a protector, until the night he vanished into the storm, leaving behind only questions. What happened to Titan? Why did he disappear? And more importantly, was he ever meant to return? Welcome to Vale Marks, where we bring you stories that touch the soul. This tale is more than just about a lost dog. It's about fate, loyalty, and the whispers of those who refuse to be forgotten. Stay until the very end. The lesson waiting for you is one that might just change the way you see love and loss forever. If you find meaning in these stories, subscribe to our channel and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support is the heartbeat of our journey. Ryan Carter could never remember a life without Titan. The blue-gray pit bull had been by his side for as long as he could recall, a silent guardian, a steadfast friend, and, above all, family. From the moment Ryan took his first shaky steps as a toddler, Titan had been there, watching over him with deep brown eyes filled with a quiet understanding that no one else seemed to notice. But Titan wasn't just a pet. He was more than that, something greater, something unspoken. While other children had stuffed animals or security blankets, Ryan had Titan, a living, breathing protector who stood between him and the world. It was impossible to ignore Titan's presence. He was powerful, his muscular frame moving with an effortless grace, yet his nature was anything but aggressive. To Ryan, he was a gentle giant, patient, loyal, and unshakable in his devotion. But to the world outside their home, Titan was something else entirely. People feared him. Neighbors whispered when he walked by. Strangers crossed the street to avoid him. Other parents clutched their children's hands tighter, their faces clouded with judgment. "Pit bulls are dangerous," they would mutter. "Unpredictable, a ticking time bomb." Ryan, even as a child, knew better. Titan had never so much as growled at anyone who didn't deserve it. He had never snapped, never bitten, never acted out of turn. He was gentle with the neighborhood kids, patient with the elderly, and fiercely protective of Ryan in a way that was both reassuring and unshakable. But the world didn't care about that. The world saw only his broad chest, his strong jaw, and the stories they had been told about dogs like him. It made Ryan angry sometimes, how quickly people judged, how easily they feared what they didn't understand. But Titan? Titan didn't care. He walked proudly beside Ryan, unbothered by their fearful glances, as if to say, "Let them think what they want. We know the truth." And Ryan did know the truth. He knew it the day he scraped his knee on the pavement and Titan pressed his warm nose against his leg, whimpering as if he could feel the pain himself. He knew it every night Titan curled up beside his bed, standing watch long after the rest of the house had gone quiet. He knew it when the world turned cold, but Titan's presence never wavered. But not everyone understood. There was a boy in the neighborhood, Lucas Parker, who had always been a bully. Bigger than the others, meaner, with a voice that carried like a siren when he wanted to make someone feel small. And one day, when Ryan was just 10 years old, he became Lucas's next target. It happened in the park after school. Ryan had been alone, kicking a soccer ball against a wall, lost in the rhythm of it. He hadn't noticed Lucas and his friends creeping closer until it was too late. "Nice dog you got," Lucas sneered, his arms crossed as he towered over Ryan. "He looks like a killer." Ryan's fingers tightened around the ball. "He's not a killer." "Sure he is," Lucas grinned, nudging one of his friends. "I heard pit bulls can snap at any second, even on their owners. Maybe he'll turn on you next." Ryan clenched his jaw, refusing to let the words get to him. He knew Titan better than anyone. He knew that was a lie. But Lucas wasn't done. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. What do you think happens when a dog like that turns mean? They put him down. One mistake. That's all it takes. Ryan's heart pounded. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, Lucas shoved him. It wasn't hard, just enough to send Ryan stumbling backward, enough to make his face burn with embarrassment. And then there was a shift in the air. A low presence moved beside him, stepping between him and Lucas without a sound. Titan. He hadn't barked, hadn't growled, hadn't bared his teeth. He had simply stood there, his massive body blocking Ryan completely, his deep brown eyes locked onto Lucas with an intensity that sent a chill down the bully's spine. Titan didn't need to snarl or snap to make his message clear. You will not hurt him. Not while I'm here. Lucas swallowed hard. His bravado flickered for just a moment, uncertainty creeping in. Chill, he muttered, taking a small step back. It was just a joke. Titan didn't move. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, until finally Lucas and his friends turned and walked away. Ryan let out a shaky breath. He looked down at Titan, at the quiet strength in his stance, at the unwavering loyalty in his eyes. And in that moment, Ryan understood something. Titan wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a protector. A force greater than fear, greater than prejudice, greater than any cruel words the world could throw their way. No matter what happened, no matter who tried to break him down, Titan would always be there, standing, waiting, watching. And Ryan knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was safe. The night Titan disappeared was a night Ryan would never forget. The storm had rolled in fast, dark clouds swallowing the sky, thunder rattling the walls of the house. The wind howled through the trees outside, and rain hammered against the windows in an unrelenting rhythm. It was the kind of storm that made the world feel smaller, like everything beyond the front porch had vanished into an endless abyss. But none of that was what woke Ryan from his restless sleep. It was the dream. In his mind, he was standing in the middle of a vast, empty field, surrounded by mist so thick he could barely see his own hands in front of him. The air was cold, pressing against his skin like unseen hands, making it hard to breathe. And then, through the fog, a shape emerged. A familiar silhouette, powerful and steady, yet somehow distant. Titan. The Pitbull stood just a few feet away, unmoving, his deep brown eyes fixed on Ryan with an expression the boy couldn't quite place. There was no wagging tail, no excited bark, no warmth in the way Titan usually looked at him. Instead, his gaze held something heavy, something Ryan had never seen before. Sadness, regret, a quiet goodbye. Ryan tried to call out, tried to take a step forward, but his legs wouldn't move. He was trapped, forced to watch as Titan turned away, disappearing into the mist like a shadow fading with the light. Panic surged in Ryan's chest. He fought against the invisible weight holding him still, fought to chase after his best friend, but the harder he struggled, the more the fog seemed to consume him. And then he woke up. His heart was pounding against his ribs, his breath coming fast and shallow as he blinked up at the dark ceiling. It took a moment for reality to settle in, for him to remind himself that it had only been a dream. But the unease lingered, heavy and suffocating. He turned his head toward the foot of the bed, expecting to see Titan curled up in his usual spot, but it was empty. The blankets were undisturbed, no sign of the comforting weight that had been there every night for as long as Ryan could remember. Something was wrong. Swinging his legs over the side of the bed, Ryan stood up, his bare feet hitting the cool wooden floor. The wind outside rattled the windows, and for the first time, he noticed a faint creaking sound, like a door shifting in the storm. His pulse quickened as he made his way toward the hallway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. As he stepped into the dimly lit kitchen, his breath caught in his throat. The back door was open, not just unlocked, wide open, swaying slightly in the wind, rain splattering onto the floor just beyond the threshold. A shiver ran down Ryan's spine, a deep, instinctual fear creeping up from his gut. Titan never left the house at night. Not unless Ryan called him. Not unless there was a reason. He took a slow, cautious step forward, his eyes darting around for any sign of movement. His voice came out hoarse when he finally spoke. "Titan?" Silence. He stepped onto the porch, the cold night air wrapping around him like a warning. The storm had soaked everything in sight. The grass glistened under the flashes of lightning. The trees swayed violently in the wind. His gaze swept over the yard, searching, hoping, but Titan was nowhere to be seen. There were no paw prints in the mud, no claw marks on the wooden porch, nothing to indicate that Titan had run off on his own. But then, just beyond the steps, leading toward the forest at the edge of their property, he saw them. Footprints, not from a dog. Human footprints, partially washed away by the rain, deep in the softened earth, trailing toward the woods. Next to them, faint but unmistakable, were the smudges of something larger, something that looked like they had been made by paws, dragged through the mud rather than walking freely. Ryan's stomach twisted into knots. Titan wouldn't have left on his own. Someone had taken him. The realization sent a rush of adrenaline through Ryan's veins. He didn't stop to think. He didn't hesitate. He ran. The rain pelted his skin as he sprinted toward the trees, his heart hammering against his ribs with every step. His clothes were instantly soaked, the wind pushing against him as if trying to hold him back, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was finding Titan. "Titan!" he shouted into the darkness, his voice swallowed by the storm. Nothing. The forest loomed ahead, tall and endless, the trees swaying like restless giants. Ryan hesitated for only a second before plunging into the shadows, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The further he ran, the harder it became to see. The darkness was thick, almost suffocating, the storm's fury muting all other sounds except for the pounding rain and the occasional crack of thunder. He didn't know how far he had gone before he finally stopped, his chest burning, his hands shaking. His voice broke as he called out again, desperate, pleading, "Titan, please!" Still nothing. The wind howled through the trees, and for the first time a terrible thought slithered into Ryan's mind. What if he was too late? What if he never saw Titan again? The idea was unbearable. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees in the mud, his fingers digging into the wet earth. The cold seeped into his bones, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache spreading through his chest. He had lost him. Titan was gone. The storm raged on, indifferent to the boy kneeling in the dark, calling out for a friend who would not answer. The wind carried away his voice, the rain washed away the footprints, and the forest remained silent, holding on to its secrets. But deep down, in the very core of his being, Ryan knew the truth. Titan hadn't just run away. Something had taken him, and no matter what it took, Ryan was going to find him. The morning after Titan disappeared, the world felt eerily different. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence that stretched across the neighborhood like an invisible fog. The sky was a dull gray, the streets still slick with rainwater, and the trees trembled from the remnants of the night's fury. But it wasn't the weather that made Ryan uneasy. It was the absence of Titan's familiar weight at the foot of his bed, the absence of the rhythmic thud of his paws against the wooden floor, the absence of the one thing in Ryan's life that had never wavered, never left his side. He barely touched his breakfast, ignoring his parents' attempts at reassurances. "Maybe he wandered off, Ryan," his mother said gently, though her voice held little conviction. "Dogs do that sometimes." But Titan wasn't just any dog. He wouldn't have left without reason. Ryan knew that deep in his bones. After barely swallowing a bite of toast, he grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The air was cold, thick with the scent of wet earth. His sneakers sank slightly into the damp grass as he made his way toward the backyard, heart pounding as he scanned the ground for any sign of Titan. He crouched near the porch steps, where the mud had been disturbed, tracing his fingers over the faint impressions left behind. There were paw prints, but they weren't scattered like they would be if Titan had been running freely. They were smudged, uneven, dragged, and next to them, barely visible under the rain-washed dirt, were footprints. Not Titan's, someone else's. A chill crawled down Ryan's spine as he followed the tracks, his pulse hammering in his ears. They led toward the trees, toward the darkened path that stretched into the woods behind the house. But just as the ground dipped into the first cluster of thick roots, the tracks vanished. Ryan stood there, fists clenched, his breathing shallow. Whoever had taken Titan had known what they were doing. He turned back toward the neighborhood, his eyes scanning the rows of houses. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Windows reflected the morning sun, lawns glistened with fresh dew, cars lined driveways as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath his feet. But as Ryan walked down the street, he noticed something strange. People were avoiding him. Mrs. Henderson, the old woman who always greeted Titan with a smile, quickly turned away when she saw Ryan approaching. Mr. Douglas, the man who constantly grumbled about Titan's size but had never truly been unkind, suddenly busied himself with raking wet leaves, refusing to meet Ryan's gaze. Others peered out from behind curtains, shadows moving behind half-opened blinds. They knew something. A knot tightened in Ryan's stomach as he quickened his pace. He needed answers. Someone had to know what had happened to Titan, and he wasn't going to stop until he found out. It wasn't until he reached the end of the street that someone finally spoke to him. Mark, the old mailman who had been delivering letters in the neighborhood since before Ryan was born, was shuffling along the sidewalk, his bag slung over one shoulder. He was the only one who didn't immediately turn away when Ryan approached, though there was something cautious in his eyes. "Mr. Mark," Ryan called, his voice slightly breathless from his search. The old man paused, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. Ryan hesitated only a second before stepping closer. "You know something, don't you?" Mark sighed, his grip tightening on his mailbag. "Ryan, listen to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are some things that are better left alone." Ryan's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? Titan didn't just disappear, someone took him." The old man exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his wrinkled face. He looked over his shoulder once more, then leaned in slightly. "There are things in this neighborhood, Ryan," he murmured, "that people don't talk about. Things that don't want to be found." Ryan's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to demand an explanation, but before he could, Mark straightened, his face returning to the neutral mask of a man just doing his job. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Ryan standing there, heart pounding. The unease in his chest deepened as he made his way back home. He didn't understand what Mark meant. What could possibly be lurking in a quiet neighborhood like this? But one thing was clear. People were afraid. He just didn't know of what. Later that evening, as the sun began its slow descent behind the rooftops, Ryan found himself drawn back to the backyard, to the last place Titan had been seen. His fingers trembled as he traced over the paw prints once more, frustration and fear twisting inside him like a storm he couldn't escape. And then, he saw it. Near the back of the yard, where the fence met the old storage shed, something stood out against the weathered wood. Ryan's breath caught as he moved closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. Scratches, deep, jagged claw marks etched into the surface of the door like a desperate attempt to escape. Titan had fought. He had been here. Ryan pressed his palm against the grooves, his throat tightening. The markings were fresh, not yet faded by time or weather. His gut twisted with the realization. Titan hadn't just been led away. He had been taken against his will, and someone in this neighborhood knew why. Determination flared in Ryan's chest as he stepped back, clenching his fists. He didn't care what secrets people were keeping. He didn't care what warnings Mark had given him. He was going to find Titan, no matter what it took. The night Charlie appeared, the air was heavy with an eerie stillness, as if the world itself had paused, waiting. The wind had died down, the usual rustling of trees absent, and the distant hum of the city beyond the neighborhood seemed muffled. Ryan had spent hours sitting on the edge of his bed, his thoughts tangled in the questions that had haunted him since Titan disappeared. His hands fidgeted with the worn leather of Titan's old collar, the nameplate dull under the dim glow of his bedside lamp. Then, just past midnight, he heard it. A sound so faint, so delicate that at first he thought he had imagined it. A light tapping against the front door, rhythmic, almost hesitant. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the sharp knock of a visitor, nor the impatient rap of a delivery. It was something smaller, something careful. He pushed back the blankets and stepped onto the cool wooden floor, moving with slow, deliberate steps. His parents were asleep, the house shrouded in a thick, expectant silence. As he reached the front door, he hesitated, his fingers hovering just above the handle. A strange feeling settled in his chest, an unshakable sense that whatever was on the other side wasn't just some lost stray seeking shelter. He turned the knob and pulled the door open. A small black Pitbull puppy sat just beyond the threshold. The porch light flickered against its sleek, rain-slicked fur, its deep, intelligent eyes reflecting the glow like twin embers. It didn't cower or tremble. It didn't flinch at the sudden rush of cold night air. Instead, it looked up at Ryan with a calm, unwavering gaze, one that sent a shiver down his spine. There was no collar, no tags, no signs of where it had come from. But there was something else. A thin, almost imperceptible scar just beneath the puppy's collarbone. Ryan's heart lurched. He knew that mark. Titan had a scar in the exact same place, earned years ago when he had gotten tangled in an old chain-link fence. Ryan had patched him up himself, pressing bandages over the wound while whispering reassurances. It had faded over time, but Ryan had never forgotten the shape of it, the exact curve of the scar tissue. And now, this puppy had the same one. A rush of confusion and disbelief flooded his mind. It wasn't possible. Yet the way the puppy stared at him, the quiet patience in its expression, it felt too familiar. Ryan knelt down, reaching out slowly, half expecting the puppy to shrink away. But it didn't. Instead, it stepped forward, pressing its small, warm nose into the center of Ryan's palm. A gesture so natural, so instinctual, that it stole the breath from his lungs. Titan used to do the same thing. Something deep inside Ryan cracked open. He didn't know why, but he scooped the puppy into his arms, feeling the rapid beat of its heart against his chest. It nestled against him like it had always belonged there, its small body warm and solid, as if it had found the one place it was meant to be. He didn't question it. Not yet. Ryan carried the puppy inside, shutting the door softly behind him. The house remained silent, the world unchanged, yet everything within Ryan felt different. He moved to the couch, setting the small dog down gently, watching as it stretched, shook off the dampness, then trotted forward with surprising familiarity. Ryan didn't move. He simply watched. The puppy wandered through the living room, pausing at the corner where Titan's old bed used to be. It sniffed the space once, twice, then without hesitation, curled up right there, as if it had been waiting to return all along. Ryan's throat tightened. He didn't say anything, didn't even breathe for a moment, afraid that if he acknowledged it too soon, the weight of it all might shatter whatever strange reality was unfolding before him. Then, the real test came. Without thinking, Ryan whispered, "Sit." The puppy obeyed instantly. His heart pounded. "Stay." Again, the tiny figure remained motionless. His hands trembled. This wasn't possible. No stray would understand commands this quickly, and not just any commands. These were Titan's commands, specific, personal, words that Ryan had trained Titan with since he was a puppy. Ryan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had to be imagining it. He had to be making connections where there were none, projecting his grief onto this dog, desperately searching for something to fill the void Titan had left behind. But then, without prompting, the puppy tilted its head, gave a small huff, then lifted a paw. Ryan's breath hitched. That was Titan's trick. A simple gesture, one that had meant nothing to anyone else, but had been theirs. A quiet understanding. A small game Titan had done for years, placing his paw into Ryan's hand as if making a silent promise. And now, this dog, this strange, black-furred puppy with a scar in the same place, who knew all the same commands, who had shown up out of nowhere, was doing it too. Ryan's vision blurred. He reached out slowly, tracing his fingers along the puppy's fur, feeling the small rise of the scar beneath his touch. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't know what this meant. But for the first time since Titan had disappeared, hope flickered inside him. It didn't make sense. It defied all logic. But deep down, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this puppy hadn't just found him by accident. It had been led here. And somehow, in some way he didn't yet understand, Titan was still with him. The morning after Charlie arrived, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The small black Pitbull pup had already proven himself to be more than just a stray. There was something about him, the way he looked at Ryan, the way he responded to Titan's old commands, the way he had curled up in the exact spot where Titan used to sleep. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. And then there was the way he kept leading Ryan outside. At first, Ryan ignored it. He convinced himself that Charlie was just a curious puppy, eager to explore. But as the days passed, it became impossible to dismiss. Every morning, Charlie would whine at the back door, tail wagging, eyes bright with expectation. When Ryan finally gave in and followed, the puppy would sprint ahead, always leading him down the same path, the dirt road that stretched beyond his backyard, winding through the trees like a forgotten trail. It wasn't a place Ryan had ever paid much attention to before. The road was old, cracked in places where tree roots had broken through the surface. It led to nothing but abandoned sheds and overgrown fields. He had walked past it 1,000 times growing up, but never once had he felt the urge to venture down that path, until now. The first time he followed Charlie all the way, something in his gut twisted. There was something unsettling about the quiet. No birds chirping, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just stillness. Then, at the very end of the road, past the trees and the tangled brush, he saw it. An old storage shed. It was smaller than he remembered, its wooden walls warped from time, the metal roof rusted and sagging at the edges. Weeds had overtaken the foundation, creeping up the sides like nature was trying to pull it back into the earth. Ryan had never given it much thought before. It had always been just another forgotten piece of the past, a place no one used anymore. But Charlie clearly thought differently. The little dog stood at the entrance, his small body tense, his ears perked forward. He let out a soft, urgent whine, glancing back at Ryan before nudging the shed's door with his nose. Ryan hesitated. It was just an old shed. There was no reason to be afraid, and yet every nerve in his body screamed at him that something was wrong. He took a breath, pushing down the unease clawing at his chest, and stepped forward. The door was heavier than it looked, the wood swollen from years of exposure to the elements. He had to shove his shoulder against it to force it open, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. The scent of damp wood and old dust filled his lungs as he stepped inside. At first, there was nothing, just stacks of forgotten junk, broken furniture, rusted tools, a few old crates pushed against the far wall. And then he saw it. Near the back of the shed, half buried beneath a pile of discarded rags, something caught the light. A glint of metal. Ryan's heart pounded as he knelt down, pushing the fabric aside. His breath caught in his throat. A collar. Not just any collar. Titan's collar. The leather was worn, the engraved nameplate scratched, but unmistakable. Titan. Ryan's fingers trembled as he picked it up. It was broken, the strap torn as if it had been ripped off with force. His stomach churned. Titan had been here. He turned the collar over in his hands, his mind racing. If Titan had been here, then where was he now? Charlie let out a low whimper, his nose pressed against something else beneath the pile of rags. Ryan reached for it without thinking, fingers brushing against crumpled paper. He unfolded it slowly. The paper was yellowed, creased, the ink smudged in places, but the words were still legible. His eyes scanned the page and his blood ran cold. "It's too strong. We can't let it continue. Take it away." Ryan's breath hitched. It. Not he. Not Titan's name. They had called him it. A terrible realization sank into his chest. Whoever had taken Titan hadn't just stolen him. They had seen him as something dangerous, something that needed to be removed. But why? His pulse roared in his ears. His hands clenched into fists around the paper, the words burning into his mind. Someone in this town had taken Titan. Someone had decided he was a problem that needed to be erased, and that meant Titan hadn't just run away. He had been stolen. Ryan looked down at Charlie, the little dog staring up at him with an expression almost too knowing, too aware. This wasn't over, not even close. The deeper Ryan dug into the truth, the darker it became. At first, he had only suspicions, whispers of something sinister happening beneath the surface of his quiet town. But as the pieces started fitting together, suspicion turned into certainty. Dogs had been disappearing for months, not just in his neighborhood but from surrounding towns as well. And now he knew why. A group had been taking them, strong dogs, intelligent ones. They weren't lost, they weren't wandering, they were stolen, dragged into a world of violence that they had never chosen. Dog-fighting rings. The realization made Ryan's blood turn ice cold. It wasn't just about Titan anymore. He had stumbled upon something much bigger, something that no one wanted to talk about. The underground circuit for dogfighting was alive and well, operating in the shadows, hidden in abandoned barns and warehouses just outside of town. And Titan, with his power, his presence, his fierce loyalty, he had been the perfect target. But Titan would never fight. Ryan knew that better than anyone. Titan would defend, he would protect, but he wouldn't attack unless he had no choice. That was who he was, and that meant that wherever he was in danger. Ryan clenched his fists as he sat in his room, the stolen note still crumpled in his hands. "It's too strong. We can't let it continue." The words burned into his mind like a brand. He had no time to waste. He had to find Titan. Charlie lay at his feet, his dark eyes locked onto Ryan as if he understood every thought racing through his head. And maybe, in some strange way, he did. Charlie had led him this far. Now it was Ryan's turn to finish what they started. He grabbed his backpack, stuffing it with essentials. His flashlight, a bottle of water, a first aid kit he had borrowed from the kitchen. He didn't know what he was about to walk into, but he needed to be prepared, and he wasn't going alone. Charlie padded beside him as they slipped into the night, the quiet hum of the town fading behind them. Ryan had followed enough leads over the past few days to know where to go. There was an old farm just outside the city limits, a place long abandoned after its owners had left years ago. No one ever went there anymore. No one except the people who didn't want to be found. The road stretched long and empty, swallowed by shadows as Ryan crept forward. His breath came slow and steady, his pulse hammering in his ears. Charlie stayed close, his small frame barely making a sound against the dirt path. When they reached the edge of the property, Ryan stopped. The old barn loomed in the distance, its structure barely holding together, its wooden frame cracked and weathered. But what caught his attention wasn't the building itself. It was the sound. A deep, low growl. Familiar. Titan. Ryan's chest tightened. He crouched behind the old fence, scanning the area. The place was far from empty. A handful of trucks were parked near the barn, their engines silent but warm like they had been used recently. A few figures moved in the dim light, men standing near the entrance, talking in hushed tones. Ryan's fists clenched. He had no plan, no backup, just a small dog and sheer determination. But none of that mattered. Titan was here. He had to get him out. Charlie whined softly beside him, his body tense. Ryan swallowed hard. He couldn't just walk in through the front. He needed another way. Keeping low, he moved along the fence, searching for an opening. Then he saw it. A gap in the side of the barn, barely wide enough for him to slip through. It looked like a panel had rotted away over time, leaving just enough space for someone small enough to crawl inside. Ryan didn't hesitate. He squeezed through, careful to make as little noise as possible. The inside of the barn smelled of damp wood and rusted metal. A single hanging light flickered near the back, casting long shadows across the floor. And then, a cage. Not just any cage, Titan's cage. Ryan's breath caught. The Pitbull was curled in the corner, his body tense, his fur matted with dirt. His ears flicked up at the sound of movement, and when he turned his head, when his eyes locked onto Ryan's, something inside Ryan shattered. Titan let out a soft whine, his tail thumping once against the floor. Even now, in pain, in confinement, he still didn't whimper, didn't beg. He was waiting. He had been waiting. Ryan moved fast. The lock on the cage was rusted but sturdy. He pulled at it, but it didn't budge. He had nothing to break it with, nothing to force it open. His mind raced. Then he heard voices, the men outside. Ryan's pulse spiked. He had no time. Charlie let out a sudden growl, his small body pressed against Ryan's leg. Then, before Ryan could react, the little dog darted forward, slipping between the wooden panels. A distraction. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a rusted wrench from the floor, shoving it into the lock and twisting as hard as he could. The metal groaned, resisted, then snapped. The cage door swung open. Titan didn't need an invitation. The second the door was free, he lunged forward, knocking into Ryan's chest. His body was warm, solid, real. Ryan barely had time to breathe before Titan was moving again, pushing him toward the gap in the wall. They had seconds. Ryan dropped to the ground, scrambling back the way he came, Titan following close behind. The second they were free, Charlie reappeared, weaving between Ryan's feet as if urging him forward. The voices were closer now, but they were already running. Ryan didn't stop. Not until they were far from the barn, far from the men who had taken Titan, far from the nightmare that had almost stolen his best friend forever. Only when they reached the safety of the trees did Ryan finally collapse, Titan's warm body pressed against his side. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ryan exhaled. Titan was home. The night Titan came home, the world felt right again, if only for a fleeting moment. Ryan sat on the floor of his bedroom, Titan's massive head resting in his lap, the warmth of his fur pressing against his skin. The once powerful dog was no longer the same unshakable guardian who had stood between Ryan and the world. His body was frail, his breathing slow, each rise and fall of his chest carrying a weight that Ryan wasn't ready to face. Titan was tired. Ryan knew it. But knowing didn't make it any easier. The house was quiet except for the occasional soft whimper from Charlie, who lay curled beside them, as if he too understood what was coming. The little black Pitbull had never once left Titan's side since they had returned home. Wherever Titan lay, Charlie was there, pressed close, his small body acting as a barrier against the inevitable. Ryan ran his fingers through Titan's fur, tracing the scars that hadn't been there before, the ones that told the story of what had happened in the time they had been apart. He swallowed against the lump in his throat. He wanted to say something, to tell Titan how much he had missed him, how much he had searched for him, how much he wished he had found him sooner. But Titan already knew. He had always known. His deep brown eyes, the same ones Ryan had grown up looking into, held none of the pain he must have felt, none of the bitterness that Ryan carried for those who had taken him. There was only love there, quiet and unwavering, just as it had always been. Ryan wiped at his eyes, even though no tears had fallen yet. "You're home now," he whispered, his voice thick. "You don't have to fight anymore." Titan let out a slow breath, his tail giving a single, weak wag against the floor. Ryan knew what that meant. It was a thank you. It was a goodbye. The minutes stretched into hours. Ryan didn't move. Neither did Titan. The only thing that changed was the slow, rhythmic breathing growing shallower, softer, until it was barely there at all. And then, just before the morning light crept through the window, Titan lifted his head. Ryan startled, his heart racing, thinking for a brief, impossible second that maybe Titan wasn't as weak as he seemed, that maybe they had more time. But Titan wasn't struggling, he wasn't fighting. His eyes met Ryan's one last time, and in them, Ryan saw everything. The years they had spent together, the countless times Titan had been there when no one else was, the protection, the loyalty, the love. Titan had never left him. Not when Ryan had been a child, scared of the dark. Not when the world had told them that dogs like him were dangerous, unworthy of love. Not even when he had been stolen away, kept from the home where he belonged. Titan had found his way back, one last time, and now it was time for him to go. Ryan felt it before it happened. The stillness, the quiet, the peace. Titan exhaled a final breath, his body relaxing into Ryan's lap, his tail flicking once as if to say, "Don't be sad. I never left you. I never will." Ryan's world stopped. For the first time since he had been a little kid, he let the tears fall, gripping Titan's fur, his body shaking as the weight of it all crashed over him. Titan was gone. But he wasn't. Because love like this, love that had withstood everything, love that had never wavered, didn't just disappear. It couldn't. It lived on in every corner of the house Titan had once filled, in the empty space at the foot of the bed, in the sound of the wind against the window, carrying whispers of something Ryan couldn't quite understand, and in Charlie, the small black puppy who had arrived the night Titan had been taken, who had known all the places Titan had been, who had guided Ryan to the truth, who had somehow carried pieces of Titan within him before Ryan even realized it. Charlie pressed his nose against Ryan's hand, letting out a small, soft whine, as if to remind him that he wasn't alone, that he never would be. Ryan took a shaky breath, his fingers brushing over Charlie's fur. Titan had saved him. Not just once, but over and over again. And in some way, he still was. Love never faded. It simply found a new way to stay. Love never truly disappears. It only changes form. Ryan never got to keep Titan forever. But in the end, Titan never truly left him. He was there in every whisper of the wind, in every shadow stretching across the yard, and most of all in the unwavering loyalty of Charlie, the little dog who carried the spirit of a guardian, lost but never forgotten. If this story touched you, if you have ever lost a pet, a friend, or a loved one, and felt their presence linger in ways you can't explain, leave a comment below. Your stories matter, your memories matter. Subscribe to Veil Marks, where we share tales that remind us of what truly matters in life. Every like, every comment, and every subscriber helps bring more meaningful stories to life. Together, let's keep these voices alive, because some bonds are never meant to be broken.